Howdy folks, and welcome back to part 2 of the Inner Rocker series on 67 to 72 Chevy trucks. Part 1 I showed you how to make an inner rocker from scratch, but now we're to part 2, which is applicable to either if you're making a rocker from scratch or if you bought one. I also wanted to thank everybody for all the positive support that the channel's been getting, and it's definitely growing. Now's a great time, if you haven't already done so, to subscribe. If you're getting benefit out of these videos, I really appreciate that, so please help me to help you and many others hopefully down the line. What you're looking at here is it all welded in, finished up, ready to go, so stick around and watch how we did it. Okay, so first thing first, I'm going to go ahead and take my brace off of here, this angle iron. We should be good now. I'm not going to move the cab with the lift. I'm going to try not to move it around too much in general till I've got the inner rocker at least tacked into place. So I just kind of had this in here for extra safety. But there's so many shapes and the angle of this floor pan, all this going on. These different shapes that you have really keep the panel stiff, if that makes sense. So this, again, this was just kind of for extra precaution. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, just grind through my little tack welds and remove it so that way we can start fitting in our inner rocker. Okay, folks, this is my inner rocker that I fabbed up myself in the previous video, and as you can tell by looking right here and somewhat right over here, it's not perfect. It doesn't line up perfectly, but that's okay. I talked about in the previous video how it's an advantage to me to work backwards, get the outer rocker where I want it, and then get the inner rocker in place after that. So all I have is the inner rocker held up with some self-tapping screws, and I need to make a pie cut right here to let this edge come in even with the pillar flange, and I need to do a little bit of the same on the other side. So I've got it marked on the bottom, which I'll show you in a minute. And it's easier to tell, but I'm going to take it back off and go ahead and cut my pie cuts and move that over a little bit and do the same thing on the other side, and then we'll be back. Okay, so I've got my pie cuts in, and whether you're fabricating your own inner rocker or you purchase a reproduction inner rocker and you're keeping an old floor, the same way I have this extra flange here, the way I determine how much flange I put up here, this top flange, is how far I wanted to make my cut into my floor pan. Now it's important that you don't, if I didn't have this flange and it just came up square right there and you welded along that curve, it's not as strong as if you bend the curve and make your weld cut up here. Okay, so that's why I did that. But if you're using if you're keeping your old floor, your reproduction inner rocker is going to come way up here. Okay, do not use that whole piece if you don't have to. So only go like an inch or two in if this is all good metal up in here. Okay. Your sweet spot is about an inch in because you avoid this little round piece for the most part, and that's just a little tip that I wanted to share with you. But you know, any reproduction panel you buy, you want to keep as much original metal as you can, and if there's no reason to cut this out, like in my case there isn't, I only went in about 3/4 of an inch. So just a quick note. But anyway, I've got my splice in there, which is going to allow me to really nicely come over to the right side. I'll have to make a little filler piece for that, but that's no big. Alright, so now I've got my splices cut and tacked over into place. I will have to make a little filler piece for that, but that comes later. And if you're curious as to what happens in this gap right here, I just make a little square and weld it up in there. So that is all kosher. We're going to go ahead and put our outer rocker back on and make sure everything's still good and continue on. Okay, so what you're looking at here is now I have the inner rocker just held in place with some screws, 2 screws at either end. I've got my rocker back in place using those same screw holes. What I've gone ahead and done is made sure these pre-made gaps still fit perfectly. And just barely, you can hear them catching, so they're right where I want them. The gap is still good. So now what I need to do is look how the gasket lines up. You'll see in a second, when I stick the gasket on, it's going to be kind of cockeyed at an angle. And what a lot of folks do to get rid of that and make it sit even is they just trim the edge of this down. Maybe an 1/8 inch or so. And the reason why they do that is because of the way the gasket sits over that lip. See, this channel has some little edges in it, so whenever you go to crimp that down, your outer rocker edge, this right here, fits into that little crimp hole. This is what this side is what contacts your door, and then this channel right here is what your outer rocker sits in. And when you slide that over it, it kind of tilts up. To me, I'm okay with that, but what a lot of people do to kind of bring that down, if you don't like that, the way that you fix it is you just trim what I showed you a minute ago. As far as everything else went though, I'm pretty happy with it. What I will probably end up doing before I slice this along that edge is put some more screws through here, and then I'll just bring my grinding cutting disc right along the edge of this inner rocker down into the floor pan and drop it down in there. And I will use these body panel holders to hold that in place, and then we'll keep moving. And I've got some clamps holding the inner rocker to the outer rocker where I want it. As I'm cutting it, I can stick these little clips in between the panels and clamp them down. Now this is going to require this panel to drop down slightly, so I'll probably have to adjust my clamps on the bottom. This is with the floor pan trimmed out to fit the inner rocker. I've got everything clamped still. Everything looks good. You saw me check the gap on the door. Still leaving that extra down there because what I'll do is I'll mark a line, and then once I'm all ready to, I'll mark a line down here at the bottom of the outer rocker, take everything off, measure up 1/8 of an inch, cut it off, and that way it'll sit in this channel good. But this turned out good. Everything's solid. That it's sitting right there on that inner rocker shelf, so we are good. I need to take everything back off and cut a slice there and cut a slice right there, because right now there's a strip sitting underneath this inner rocker, which has the floor pan. It's like a 1/2 inch of the floor pan still hanging there. So I'll take everything off, trim that out, then put it all back on, put some tacks in it, just on the inner rocker, just enough to hold it, and then we'll keep moving forward. Okay, so I've taken all this back off, cleaned everything up, got it down to bare metal, so I can tack weld this. Once again, every time you move panels, take panels off, even though we've got the outer rocker screwed into place in like 6 different places, you always recheck your gaps and your spacing on everything. So I've already done that. As far as the bottom of the door to the bottom of the rocker goes. So I think now I'll go ahead and add some tacks between the inner rocker and the floor pan, and then I'll drill some holes through the 2 inner and outer rockers to add some clecos, and then we'll cut off the bottom of the inner rocker to sit up in the outer rocker. Okay, so I've got 5 tacks between the inner rocker and the floor pan. Now, as I said, I'm going to use clecos to hold the outer rocker to the inner rocker. And before I drilled the holes for the clecos, I wanted to make sure I've got some pretty solid contact between the inner rocker and the floor pan, because these patch panels, when you start drilling on a panel, they'll move around. They're nice for just holding stuff in place to tack, but any sort of a lot of vibrations, that sort of thing, you really need to have a better method to hold it in place. So for those who don't know, this is a cleco, and these are the cleco pliers. And what they do is you drill an 1/8 inch hole. See if the camera's going to focus for you. And you press it in, and when you depress the pliers, there's a little, let's see if you can see it. It's essentially like a temporary rivet, and when you depress it, you can see that the diameter of that little piece expands around that little notch, so it'll hold panels in place. And you can get these sets on eBay or Amazon for pretty cheap. I mean, it came with the pliers and this whole set for less than $20, so you don't have to buy the name brand stuff. So what I'm going to do now is just mark 3 holes, I think, that I'm going to drill through the outer rocker and the inner rocker. And anytime you want to drill a precise hole, you just use a spring punch. And for the 100th time, check my gaps, and they're just fine. So now what I'm going to do is just let off of my clamps for a second and reattach them to make sure all that movement I just did didn't change anything. That's where I want it. Okay, so now I'm going to mark right along the bottom edge of that outer rocker against my excess inner rocker. And we're going to take our clamps off. Then we're going to take our outer rocker off. Then I'm going to measure up about 1/8 of an inch, because this inner rocker that you see, the bare metal, we're going to measure up 1/8 of an inch from that line I just drew and push it in, and we're going to, this inner rocker sits in this little lip of your outer rocker. So we're going to take the outer rocker, we're going to take our clamps off, we're going to take the outer rocker, move it out of the way, measure up 1/8 of an inch, draw a line, and cut that off. Okay, so now I've got everything back on, and the inner rocker's sitting in the outer rocker lip where it's supposed to be down at the bottom. I've got every 2 inches marked across the bottom of the rocker. So right now I'm going to go ahead and drill some holes through those and get some clecos across the bottom as well. I now have the seam pretty much welded up on the top. So the outer rocker is going to come back off, and we're going to get the inner rocker welded to the pillars at the front and the rear. Okay folks, so that is the inner rocker. I've got the seam all cleaned up. I weld typically on these rockers, I weld the top, then I go from the bottom and weld it all the way across, and I just knock the tops off of the bottom welds, but on the top I grind them almost all the way flush. You can just barely feel them, and that's good, just so if there's some material on the bottom, keeps it strength. And I've got the edges filled in and connected to the pillars real well. So now the inner rocker's done. If you've been following along, my outer rocker is pretty much finished. I've just got some cleanup to do on this end, and I'm gonna take all of this piece out and make just one flat piece to go on the end cap. What I did on the other side and what I'm going to do on this side is enclose the rocker. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to put holes in it yet, but I'm going to make a square here to come down and meet the outer rocker, and the same thing up front, so it's all enclosed. And I'll have another video of like the final assembly, if you will, but once I get this piece, this corner piece on that I was talking about, make one for the other side, and finish up the two ends on the outer rocker, I'll come in and spray sealer on this inner rocker and the bottom of this, where all the welds are and the bare metal on the inner rocker, and then I'll spray the inside of the outer rocker. Real quickly, I just wanted to show you the bottom. You can see where I tied it in. Had to make a split here to bring it over to meet up with the pillar, and all that's welded up, and I just grind the tips off of those welds and I leave it just like that. So I'll seam seal all this underneath here, and when I go to flip the cab on its back, to paint the bottom of this cab, because I'm planning on doing some sort of rhino liner to it, before I do any of that, I'm going to scuff this whole bottom, because it's just got that E-coat or whatever from LMC, and then I'm going to seal the whole thing, and then I'm going to put seam sealer down over all these welds, over all the corners, all the floor pan welds. I mean, I'm going to seam seal the whole, everywhere that needs to be seam sealed on the bottom of the truck. I'll probably seal it one more time and then rhino line it. So that's just a FYI note for you. Alrighty folks, well, it's been about 6 or 7 days since you saw the last video, so I figured I needed to go and finish it up, and it's all finished up. Welds are ground down, it's in place, everything looks great. It's about 33 degrees out here right now, and I can't believe I can't see my breath. It's freezing cold, and that background noise you hear is a 4-foot fan I got blowing out the back with the front garage door, one of them propped open just to keep fresh air in here all the time, so it's pretty nippy. Once again, thanks for watching. I appreciate everybody who's subscribing and liking the videos and sharing them. There's been quite a bit positive reaction to these, which I'm happy to see. You know, at the end of the day, I'm making them for y'all, so I do have some more good news. I am anticipating getting another cab, and it needs a It needs everything that this one did, almost. So I will record and show you how to replace the floor pan step by step, which is what a lot of you guys have asked about. Unfortunately, I didn't start video in this cab until well, after the floor was in place. So anyway, that pretty much wraps up this video. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you guys next time.